I'm reading the Quran, I'm listening to the Quran, but I simply can't feel anything. I can't feel this peace and comfort which people are always talking about. Now, inshallah, in this video, we're going to be tackling these points on the screen on how you can get more excited, more passionate, more affected and emotional by reading and listening to the Quran. And if you're not willing to watch the whole video, then you can at least skip to some specific points which may be interesting or lacking on your part. The first point we're going to start with is Iman. I mean, obviously, how often you read this book and listen to it and are actually affected by it is going to depend on your Iman. And I doubt I'll need to explain why that's the case. But the central topic of this video is not Iman, so it will seem like I'm rushing through this point a little. But the point I want to get across is we need to make the problem as clear as possible. When I'm struggling to read the Quran every day and to actually be affected and emotional by it, then rather than telling yourself, I am not affected by the Quran, change it to, my Iman is low. How can I increase that? Or at least it's not as high as I'd like it to be. So now we need to take a step back. Before looking at the Quran, how are my other aspects of life which are in a way more important and more mandatory? Am I praying my 5 prayers? Okay, I'm praying them. Am I praying them in time? And I have a hadith on the screen which says that the most beloved act to Allah is prayer in its time. Okay, we're doing that. Now, am I praying it in the masjid as a man? Am I waking up for Fajr? So we look at these things which really set a foundation which is perfect for leading to wanting to build the habit of reading the Quran. The things which will affect your Iman are going to be some things which you can and cannot control to an extent. Now, this extent is applied to the environment, the friends you surround yourself with. Are there specific sins which are dragging you down in terms of Iman? You see, Iman in a nutshell is actually having belief in your heart and then stating it with your tongue and doing things with your actions. So the more you can obey Allah, the more good you can do, your Iman is going to increase, and the more bad you can let go, your Iman will also increase. So the point is, increase your Iman. Now, ironically, one of those things which will increase your Iman is reading and listening to the Quran in itself. But now, I want a practical tip. So here's the first practical tip I'm going to give you, and that is treat the Quran the same way you see other people treat music. Now, hear me out and let me explain. The Quran was sent down to benefit us. It was sent in our favor. And for us to listen to it while it's seeming forced to us or kind of like a homework would show us clearly there's something wrong. And I want you to just ponder with me really quickly on this aspect of the Quran. The way Allah has revealed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ on how to recite it with the tajweed and the med and this melodious, somewhat singing way. We don't call it singing, it's reciting, but trying to get a point here. It's without the shadow of a doubt in order to add this layer to the Quran which makes it more appealing to listen to and more easier to memorize. So that's the first thing I just want you to put in your mind. Now, what can you do? A very underrated piece of advice is pick reciters which you like, which you genuinely enjoy. Reciting the Quran is a whole science in itself. Reciting involves different levels of pitches, different maqamat, which are, in a nutshell, maybe different ways of reciting with different emotions. There's like a more happy sounding recitation, a more sad sounding recitation which is kind of meant to scare you, the recitations meant to increase your khushu'ah. These are all a whole menu for you to select from different reciters with different voices.
فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong to simply intentionally try to find one which you like more than others, right? It's not to say that I don't like this person and I'm gonna say, oh, his recitation is bad. No, it's in the we're talking about people who are reciting correctly. They are all, yani, inshallah, accepted by Allah, but it's okay to have some which you like more than others. Now, one of my most listened to reciters are Sheikh Minshawi, Sheikh Mishary, and Sheikh Al-Husari. And in the description, I'm going to leave some of my most played recitations when I'm in the car and I pay attention, or I listen to before sleeping, or ones I memorize from, because trust me, just give them a chance and I guarantee you will find a handful which will just sound incredible to you. Now obviously there's no point in reading and listening to all of these recitations if we're not really understanding anything that's being said or not applying anything that's being said. And that's why the next step is to make it a conscious goal and a conscious effort to understand the Quran and to do tadabbur. And tadabbur is the Arabic word for pondering. Now at its most basic level, this consists of reading the Quran consciously and like actively and trying to understand what's being said. And when you find something interesting or something you don't understand, then stop and be like, why'd Allah say this? Why'd Allah say, phrase the sentence or the verse this way and not this way? Or what does this mean? And this aligns with the exact reason which Allah sent down the Quran, لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ, in Surat Sad. Now, the most basic way you can do this is by reading a translation in a stronger language of yours, because even many Arabic speakers are not going to understand certain words. I mean, if you take Surat Al-Adiyat, for example, the first few verses are extremely difficult Arabic words which I've only learned recently. Now, along with the translation, we also have tafsir, which means interpretation. And not everyone needs to do tafsir necessarily, especially when you're at a stage of doing translations, which is the stage I'm in. But a big part of translations is already tafsir. And tafsir means to interpret what these verses mean. But the benefit of also doing tafsir is that it gives you the context and background of certain things which are not directly and literally mentioned in the Quran. And now I want to give you guys an example of what I do and some of the books which I have. So let's just quickly just put this here and show you real quick. Now when it comes to tafsir, I have Tafsir As-Sa'di, which you can see right over there in my background. And the really nice thing about this is that it's very easy to understand, even though, finishing all of this is not easy, and it does give you the information in a lot of detail, and it does require, effort. But to take an example, let's say we have Surat let's pick a surah which everyone knows. Let's say Surat Al-Zalzala, and it gives you the verses in Arabic, the translation in English. Hopefully you guys can see. And then you have the interpretation of the parts of the verses and in what context they're being talked about. And sometimes he references other verses and relates it to them, and references hadiths. So it really just adds a whole element to your understanding. Let's take a quick break before moving to the next few tips. Do you guys notice how we're adding layers to the Quran? So first there's the aspect of the tajweed and actually listening to the recitations and how it sounds, and it being emotional and having khushu' when it comes to the listening. But then there's also the aspect of the meaning of the words and the translation and the tafsir, which when you're in prayer you start thinking about what these things actually mean, along with the emotion in which they're recited in. It's just a complete elevated experience. And who knows, maybe after applying some of these tips, maybe you can shed a tear or two while reading at home, while praying in Jama'ah in the masjid. But let's move on to the next tip, and that is find a problem in yourself and then find the solution in the Quran and in the Sunnah. Now, a problem which we all fall for, especially in this generation, is seeking help about, let's say, mental health or the problems about happiness and these things with almost everything besides Islam. And it's quite literally beating around the bush, right? It's like you get your tips from self-help books. Like, let's assume I would just use Atomic Habits and not really take advice from the Quran, not take advice from the Sunnah, right? This is a huge problem, and it is literally the definition of beating around the bush. You're doing everything besides the first thing which you had to do. Now, the Quran is not a book which you go to if you want to study science. It's not a book you go to if you want to gain muscle. But when it comes to the core problems in life and the core things to do with value and what really matters for you to enter Jannah, the Quran and the Sunnah has all of your answers. Now, let's just take an example. Let's say you're reflecting upon yourself and you're thinking, am I in a state to enter Jannah? And am I in a state to enter Jannah al-Firdaus al-A'la, the highest level of Jannah? So then you're like, okay, let me open the Quran. And then you come across Surat al-Mu'minun. You see, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ, and so on. And then you notice that in one of the verses, these are describing the characteristics of people who will enter Jannah al-Firdaus al-A'la. So now you treat these verses like a checkbox, and you're like, okay, do I have khushu' in my prayer? I can work on that. And then you move on to the next point, to the next point, to the next point. And now your whole mindset about the Quran changes. The Quran is your therapy. The Quran is your first resort when it comes to seeking help. And then you also, if you're upset or something, you go back to the Prophet's stories. You see, for example, Surat Yusuf, from him being thrown into a well by his brothers, and then being falsely accused, and then being imprisoned, and being away from his family and not seeing his father for a long time. Just, it's really that thing which you always go back to. And that makes it very special. And it makes you have a personal, deep connection with the Quran, which is exactly what we want to be affected by it, to have emotion when reading it and reciting it and listening to it. Now we're on to the last 2 points, and this tip here is more of a tip of a change of mindset than a tip of you doing something. And I saw it from this video over here by Zaid, which I really liked, and I coincidentally saw actually while I was done gathering my ideas for this video. Or actually I say coincidentally, but everything's from Allah. Now, what he was saying in the video, he was talking about how Allah sent or revealed the Quran to Prophet Muhammad through Jibreel alayhi salam. And Jibreel alayhi salam became the most high-ranking servant to Allah. And then you have Prophet Muhammad, who the Quran was revealed to. And then he became the greatest of humans and the greatest of creations. And then you have Islam. You have the Muslims, the Ummah of Islam. And that became the best of all Ummahs, and it was the Ummah which the Quran was revealed to. It's basically the point he's trying to make here is that everything associated with the Quran just becomes blessed. It becomes better by times 10 or times whatever number. And if you just apply that to an individual level, to a personal level, to you, ignore, for this example, ignore the Ummah for now, apply it to yourself. Imagine how much barakah you'll have in all your actions, how much khair you'll have in your life. And I just think it's something amazing to think about. The last thing I want to say in this video, which I can't believe, it sounds very obvious, but it's something which I completely lacked in. And that is understanding that the Quran and the verses are Allah's words to me. They're His words to me. Sounds very obvious, but what I mean is, you know, when, let's just say an example of a teacher yelling at a classroom, okay? And there's 20 students and you're one among those students. Now, it doesn't feel like the teacher is yelling at you, because you're among a big group, right? So it doesn't really affect you. The point I'm trying to make is Allah is not like this teacher. Allah is talking to everyone individually because He's As-Sami', He's Al-Basir, He's Al-Raqib. And everything He says is not like He's talking to a crowd, He's talking to everyone individually because He hears and responds to our du'as and everyone individually. So when we read the Quran and we read a verse which says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, I literally do this at home. I tell myself, Allah is talking to me right now. I say this, Allah is talking to me. I am one of the people who amanu, one of the mu'mineen, He's talking to me. Or let's say, La tahzan inna Allah ma'ana. I am a part of this ma'ana, right? And I'll give one amazing example which I read in the book Ad-Da' wad-Dawa'. And I want to show you guys this now. As you can see over here, we have the verse La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Now, this verse refers to what Sayyidina Yunus said when he was in the whale, in the stomach of the whale, in the night, in the darkness of the ocean, in the darkness of inside the whale. I know I phrased that really badly, but just imagine this scenario. And Sayyidina Yunus is saying, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. What does Allah say after that? فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. These verses are for us, they are for us to use. When you make a dua and you want Allah to accept it from you, or you've done something wrong and you want to do tawbah, we use this in our dua. We say, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. These things are meant for us. So, make the Quran personal. Perceive Allah as Him talking to you. Yes, He's talking to everyone, but don't exclude yourself out of everyone. You get what I mean? I did say I was done and I had last two tips, but I do have to mention a very big one. And I'm only gonna say it in one sentence, and that's it. Music and Quran cannot exist in your heart equally at once. Watch this video if you want the elaboration, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وأوحينا إلى أم موسى أن أرضعيه فإذا خفت عليه فألقيه في اليم ولا تخافي ولا تحزني